The HazBeanz Show with me, Martin Beanz Warde, the podcast that travels in the back of a van. Hello and welcome everyone to the HazBeanz Show. We're now in season 2 and today we have a very special episode. For the very first time, it's going to be a space shared only by LGBT Travellers. I want to welcome to the podcast today, Hughie Maughan of Celebrity Big Brother. The celebrity from Big Brother. We've got James Lawrence all the way over in Bristol. We have Ruby O'Brien all the way over in... Where are you, Ruby?
Kerry.
County Kerry? Oh, Jesus. You may as well be over in another country. And we have Oein DeBharduin, a long-time a school friend of mine, actually, from childhood, and somebody who's been working effortlessly towards promoting LGBT traveller issues since the early, 2009 was the group, wasn't it, Ron? We'll get into that in a second.
Please,
anyway.
Don't age me.
Don't be scandalising me with my age. So, welcome everyone. And as I said, it's an open space. We can discuss whatever we want. But I want to kick off first, I suppose. I'm looking at the screen and I can see James Lawrence. So the way I'm looking at it is I'm going to go in order of what's on the screen in front of me. So James Lawrence, can you just tell us a little bit about, I suppose, where you're from and what kind of services and things like that are available to LGBT travellers in your area?
Okay, so I'm from Bristol and we're starting up our own Gypsy Roma Traveller group over here as well. It's called Gr8 Bristol. So at the moment, there's not actually much going on over here specifically for LGBTQ travellers, but the group that we are starting up is aimed to also help LGBT travellers as well. And also there's a different organisation called Off the Record, which it's not a traveller group at all, but that's somewhere that I used to go to myself before I came out as gay, and it gave me an awful lot of support with one-to-one counselling and helped me just understand who I am as a person and to just accept myself as a gay man.
Okay, Hughie, can you do the same? Just tell us where you're from and what kind of services do you know that's available to LGBT travellers in your area?
So I'm from Ballymun in Dublin, in Ireland, obviously.
No.
And no, you can never tell with my accent, can you? But no, so in Dublin, there's obviously a lot of travellers' rights organisations that have a lot of different topics and whatever that they discuss and promote and help. I don't feel though that there is a lot of support or promotion when it comes to LGBT travellers or issues relating to that. It's never really at the forefront of what they talk about. I don't really believe their campaigns is really funded for that subject as much as it would be, say, for travellers' housing or racism against the travellers or travellers' education or whatever like that. So there is Exchange House, there is the ITM, there is Pabby Point. There is the local community centres and youth clubs and stuff that will be there for everyone, regardless if you're a traveller or not. But let's just say directly a group that would be for LGBT travellers, I don't really know of one. I know people that work in these organisations that do help or would be there for you within, say, the men's health sector or whatever, within these organisations. But you wouldn't really know that until you went to them yourself. It's not really something that gets talked about a lot until now, hopefully. I think it's a conversation that's opening up a lot more.
I would agree. And Ruby O'Brien?
Hello. Yeah, I'm from Tralee, and basically I never ever got support from the LG, nothing like that or anything. And I don't really, down here, I don't think there isn't any much, in Listowel or something, the sports LGBT people and stuff, but not in Tralee. I don't think there isn't any in Tralee.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I'm going to go back to that actually because Oein, you might be able to find out what's the closest, I suppose, group or.
Ruby, can I ask you a quick question, please?
Yeah.
Do you find that there was a lot more support for LGBTQ travellers when you were staying over in London than you do in Kerry?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
Oh, so you were in London as well?
Yeah.
So it's a big, massive difference then.
There is, yeah.
I mean, London to Tralee, with everything, there'd be a big difference. Even Dublin to Tralee. But it might be that in England, because there's a lot more people and some of these organisations, because I've noticed the organisations in London compared to Ireland when it comes to all of these topics that we're discussing, or even just travellers in general, things were more advanced, or there was more people who worked in these organizations who I've spoken to in the past about possibly doing campaigns or whatever with. So I think that might be to do with kind of figures rather than they're not really always been the support. If you look at a town to a city like London with 18 million people, chances are there'll be more support for a lot of things.
I might just bring Owen in on this actually. So Owen, if you just want to do the same, maybe just introduce yourself. I suppose you know a lot of this stuff actually, so you'd be probably best placed.
I mean, you were involved originally in our original LGBT kind of support group. It was kind of semi-formed around 2005, and then it was formed in 2009, which we call LGBT PAVI, and later adopted the name LGBT Tara, and it's completely unfunded peer-led support group. Which over the years been working on building the networks, building core supports, like kind of having pre-COVID, having kind of in-person meetings, like follow up around crisis response. There's a lot of ability there. And here in the situation of Ireland, it's the intersectionality that happens, that there are LGBT groups and there are traveller groups. Yet when you fall in the cluster of both, people don't have the cultural competency or awareness in order to support you appropriately. And like we're at the situation, like I mean, kind of like one of the occasions you spoke markedly aware of, and we arranged a night out with a collection of LGBT people, and we refused entry into LGBT space because there was an assumption that travellers wouldn't have entered those spaces because people were not familiar or open to the idea of travellers wanting to enter such spaces and being comfortable with their orientation. I do think there's a lot to be said around cultural competency, resources not being afforded, campaigns that could be identified or become secondary, and also the noise of other issues. People hear the noise of accommodation, mental health struggles, and they see that they don't really always see the LGBT struggle as being a part of it, they see it always being separate. And if you look at even our population here in Ireland, we understand that 1 in 10 people might have LGBTQI experience of identity. We're looking at 4,000 travellers who are not receiving appropriate support.
Yeah.
And I think that does provide us a bit of challenge, but we're not strangers from each other. And I do think, even in my understanding of all the years, I mean, this may about 20 years, like God, but like the transition for a lot of people, especially around the trans community, you know, or kind of a queer kind of identities, gender non-binary, have left the country because they find it easier to get lost in the larger population numbers of England, especially London, than staying here in Ireland. And I do think we're losing a lot of wonderful, beautiful people because the supports and information education isn't in place as it needs to be. And we most certainly deserve better.
Yeah, I suppose then I'm going to open up to everyone. So what I want to know is your experiences of homophobia first. And to begin with, I want to focus more on homophobia within the traveling community. So around like what was it like growing up for you as a traveller and LGBT plus? So I suppose again we'll go with James first, maybe.
To be honest, growing up, I had a lot more homophobia up against me before I came out as gay, because like I was always like a more femme acting man, and within the travel community, like if someone kind of picks up on those senses, you get called like normal names like Nancy boy and this, that, and the other. So I had a lot more of it before I came out, and then when I actually came out, then everyone was just like, oh, he's gay. He knew, like everyone knew it, kind of thing.
And Hughie?
Yeah, I definitely second what James said. I think that's kind of across the board in life in general. That's why I think the term "it gets better" is there. You don't understand it, I suppose, until you're in that position there afterwards. But kind of, you know, like looking back, it's like when you own who you are. There's this advice I'd give to anyone: is a bully then kind of doesn't have something to focus on. Is when you know it bothers you, let's say, then they'll keep on saying it to you. But of course, like I faced homophobia, whether to be travellers or not. But I've got to admit that it affected me a lot worse growing up, or I did get it a lot more from other travellers, weirdly enough, than I did non-travellers, if that makes sense to you. Because it's one thing, for example, going to school and somebody saying something to you, but if you feel they're like, then you can't go home and talk about it, it becomes 10 times worse to you. And one of the reasons like why you don't feel like you can't talk about it, it's not because you don't think your parents care about you, it's that you don't think they'll ever understand. Because you hear the conversations that your father has with other men, and the way that they jive one another and they joke, and the kind of the terminology they use. It might not even be like bad people deep down inside, but they also wouldn't stand up, for example, if somebody was being called homophobic names, and it makes you sit and think, how can I tell him that when, you know, they jive about certain things? Like they typecast a man if he was to dress himself or look a particular way. You're typecasted and called like homophobic names, like it would be a negative thing to be gay, and they're associating it with behaving in particular ways. Do you get what I'm trying to explain? Yeah. So the homophobia, like I had it in the traveling community, was to the point of I would have rather be dead at that point. That's how bad it was. But I suppose maybe that's something we can talk about more throughout the podcast. But yeah. I got a lot more homophobia within the traveling community than I did outside of it, 1,000,000%.
And Ruby, I suppose, as a trans traveller,
yeah.
like it must have been like I'm not going to assume, but I would imagine that there's a lot more like a lack of understanding.
There's a lot more hate towards transgender people than gay people.
In my opinion, definitely, yeah.
Yeah, definitely, I agree too.
Yeah, I've faced hate actually by travellers in London and Ireland, and I think it's travellers. They're very still back. They're still kind of, I don't know, towards transgender people. Anyways, it's like they don't want to accept it at all. It's like, you know, it's like whatever about gay people. I feel like they're still bad to gay people, but I feel like when you're transgender, it's 20 times worse. Sir.
You get, like I've heard comments. Sorry, continue on. I
got attacked once in London with my cousin Oein by these travellers in a van. I called the police at the time as well, and the egg dolls egged me, not my cousin Oein, and they were shouting, you know, words like horrible words that travel, you know, like some slurs, and like tranny and things like that, like, you know, because I was wearing makeup and things, and when they went down further down the road, they pulled in and they ended up coming out and hit me a box. I mean, the way I am. So I feel like there is a lot of hate, and especially in my hometown as well. There's a lot of a lot of travel community here are very ignorant towards it.
So
we might return to that. I just think there's something fascinating about, because we're all here to learn from each other. And I definitely know that I need to learn a lot more about issues facing trans travellers. So we will return to that, Ruby, and I do appreciate you even talking about it. And Oein, I suppose for yourself, you've probably talked about this various times.
I think Ruby's kind of comment there is ignorant. Is the point one that people are ignorant. There is an information gap. I think that comes from a lot of places. It comes from people being isolated and experience isolation and deliberate exclusion. There's people who want to salvage their identity. If you feel your identity is being under attack, you can reduce it to minority aspects, and some else not following that template of exposure upsets your own identity, which means you backlash, you know, which means it's not always anything to do with yourself, but there's an innate need of, I feel my identity is under attack because you're free and yours. You know, I think that's one of the principles that we sometimes don't always consider. Also, an enormous education gap where people actually knowing, understanding, having thought through the processes, the way that our identities are all flexible, but of course it's more difficult when people feel under so much pressure to hold on to their own. But also the social mobility, most travellers have not been afforded the opportunity to mix with the majority population in ways that we can be seen as peers and cohorts and people of our own outcomes and in charge of our own destinies. We're often reduced to figures. So when we brush against those ideas, homophobia can be very real, and transphobia, and anything to do with the kind of the queer expressions, because not only are we challenging other people's preconceived understandings about ourselves, we're exposing them to their own preconceived understandings of themselves and their own limits and their own hesitation. So for instance, going like, homophobia has never been a problem to me because I'm not homophobic towards myself. Homophobia is a problem of the wider community, and it's based on, as Ruby I think very eloquently said, it's based on ignorance. It's people not knowing better.
I think,
and that doesn't excuse them, but it does say that information and understanding is most certainly.
Yeah, I agree with that with a lot in life. I think that like the whole like both of my parents, for example, that's why I meant earlier on when I said about my father-in-law, doesn't make them bad inside. Now, this isn't the case for everyone. There's some people that's just bad people and want to judge you no matter what you do because they're so unhappy within themselves. Because hurt people. I mean, ask any psychologist that. And I know that from personal experience. But like with both of my parents, and like a lot of people in life, when they knew better, they did better. Like I, for example, because I've been the person that's faced adversity or been suppressed, I don't understand everything about transgender people, but I would still watch my words, I would ask questions, and I wouldn't use particular terminology, regardless of how I mean it. But that's because I understand what it feels like from a personal perspective to be in that position where somebody doesn't mean something in a rude way, but it's like kind of like passive aggressive, how they'd say, oh God, you're gonna football for a gay man or something, and they don't mean it in a bad way, but it's still kind of as part of that issue because subconsciously it shows there's a particular narrative there. But I understand that because of personal perspective. There's a lot of people out there who don't understand. If you look at like famous things, there's people that are racist, to use particular words, especially in Britain, if they're talking about, I don't know if I can say the word, but say a corner shop in Britain and it's owned by an Asian man, that's called a something shop.
Yeah.
Right? They don't mean that as in being racist, because they go into the bloody shop and they're probably friends with the man in the shop and he's had that shop since they were kids. But they have to, like, or they're ordering a Chinese, I'm going to get a something tonight, and they say a racial slur to just describe the meal because it's a Chinese. You can't, just because your friend is gay doesn't mean you can go call people faggots and whatever else we feel like. And even if you mean it like, oh, my friend's a faggot, I'm not bothered. Like, yeah, you're not being homophobic, but it's still like passive aggressive. And it's only when you understand better that you do better. And that goes right back to everything like Oein said, is that there's so many people out there who just do not understand gay people, don't understand transgender people, and they don't help something, they don't try to promote it, but like, there might not be a nasty, bad person deep inside, but you just haven't got the right education. They haven't had the right experiences, which is why what we're doing now is really important. And I think why there's more travellers that come out as gay nowadays is because you just see so many more people. When I grew up, I had no one to look at on TV and think, I can relate to you at all, which is why it was so horrible.
Yeah, I think visibility is extremely important.
Definitely.
I think the more we see, it's that old adage, you know, if you can see it, you can be it, and if you can be it, you can believe to be it. So if we see more visibility from LGBTQI plus travellers, what happens is the next generation will grow up knowing that, well, I'm not the only one. Because you're right, it's a very lonely world when you think that you are the only one.
Yeah.
But like, I think I think now is the time for us to come as a collective to make it easier for the next generation. Because look, there's not one person in this conversation here today that doesn't understand what it's like to be, you know, mentally unwell because of the society that's around us. Be that for being LGBT or be that for being a traveller. We know what it's like, and we
face it on both sides.
Yeah. I suppose, James, would you like to kind of jump in there? I suppose we'll move on towards the mental health side of things. And you're very outspoken about mental health issues with travellers. You're very much supportive of all the stuff online that kind of highlights stuff, especially when Rosemary Maughan is sharing something. You're always really behind the causes. I suppose, what do you see would be a great way forward to help the next generation of LGBT travellers?
I agree with everyone else what you're all just saying there about, like, it is important to get us into the mainstream media and that visibility, seeing LGBTQ travellers in the limelight and whatnot. But also at the same time, I do think it's also important that we actually celebrate our mental health, because mental health is good and bad. It's not always just bad mental health. We need to celebrate, because a lot of traveller families, and we'll all know this, there's a lot of traveller families who just try to push things under the carpet, and then eventually that bloody carpet is going to have a big mountain of rubbish underneath it, and that's just going to get worse for yourself. So I do think it's so important that we celebrate our mental health and just not like shun people for having those issues, because I don't know how common it is about statistics and that, but I'm sure there's many travellers that's got bad mental health. So I just think it is very important that we speak out about them kind of topics, especially 2021 with so many young men and whatnot taking their own life and everything. You know, it's such a hard topic, but it needs to be spoken about.
It does. It needs to be destigmatized, because again, it's like that thing. If you don't talk about it, people will pretend it doesn't exist. And if you're pretending it doesn't exist, then you're not actively looking for a solution.
Would all of you guys attribute? I can't blame all on this, but would you guys attribute, like, the statistics of travellers to say that it's 8 times harder to die of suicide than any other background? And in Britain, suicide is the biggest killer of men under 40. Drugs, which is an epidemic in the world, so many people take drugs, doesn't kill as many people as suicide. Cancer, they say 1 in 3 people get it in their lifetime, doesn't kill as many people. under 40 as suicide does, and then to be a traveller at 7 to 8 times higher than that, which is just an outrageous figure when you sit down and think about it. Would you guys attribute that statistic majorly to people feeling so suppressed that they can't probably be their own individual, speak out about how they feel, especially men, as I think men in general in society is more suppressed when it comes to the mental health because there's that stigma around being the macho man. I think it's changing and more people are talking about it. But would you attribute that huge figure of young travellers with mental health problems, suicide and even drug use to them feeling so suppressed that if they're married to somebody, women, and they want to get divorced and be with somebody else, they are looked at in a different way? If they have sex outside of marriage, if you're gay, if you're transgender, would you attribute that to feeling underneath that much pressure, that suicide figure?
I definitely think it does take a part of it.
What about yourself, Hughie? What would your own point be on that?
100%. I think that's probably the biggest reason for it. The biggest reason, because anytime I've ever spoken to a traveller who's ever come out, we've all had the exact same opinion. And even when I speak to non-traveller people who have come out, yeah, they've experienced homophobia and stuff like that, but for the most part, in my experience, it just hasn't been the same as it has for me and any cousins that have come out as gay and anything like that. It's a completely different ball game. And the thing that upsets me the most is I sit down and I think about it, and I think, how many travellers complain that they can't get into venues because they're judged for being a traveller without the person knowing them? How many travellers complain that the council and the government and people just doesn't care about travellers' rights to do the next person? They're like, oh, it'll never change. And how many of these organisations are government funded and taxpayer funded to talk about racism towards travellers? But our biggest issue, in my opinion, is internal stigma. Nobody talks about it. No high-profile travellers talk about it. Tyson Fury has never ever tried to educate himself and talk about it. Paddy Doherty has never talked about it. None of these people ever talk about it. It's only it's sort of a segregated group. It's only some people that are passionate and want to stand up about it themselves talk about it. It's never at the forefront. It's never the first conversation. If somebody from a travellers' rights organisation got the chance to go on the Late Late Show and they were said you have to pick one topic, LGBT traveller issues within the travelling community would never be the topic that would come to their brain straight away to talk about. It would be racism against travellers' housing crisis, or whatever was in the media this time about travellers being typecast. You never want to focus on that issue that's within the travelling community where young people just cannot be their own individual, that you're forced into this way of life that it's like, oh, because you're a traveller, you have to be like this. And nobody talks about it. And I think that's the biggest problem within the travelling community. It never gets spoke about.
Well, Ruby, do you have any thoughts on that, actually?
Actually,
and Hughie, brilliant point, and we're going to get into that again in a while, because that's the structural stuff there, and there's also a bit of religion as also, you know, the kind of traditional.
Definitely.
But we would that's a wider topic. We're definitely going to talk about that though, for a fact. But just while we're briefly talking about mental health, I'd like for everyone just to have a little bit of, I suppose, input into this, because like it's important to kind of find out, because just what you said, we all come from different mindsets and perspectives. But Ruby, I'd be interested there. What would your experience be? I'm not going to ask you what's your mental health like, you know, I'm not looking for that. But what I suppose, what would your experience be like, you know, being treated by people, and if you were feeling down, was there supports or people that you could go to?
Okay. Basically, I came out as gay before I came out as transgender because it was easier than coming out as transgender. And personally, myself, I felt like a lot of travellers in Kerry accepted me for being gay, but when I came out as transgender, they stopped talking to me. And they just didn't bother talking to me anymore. They just acted like I was a stranger, and a lot of them were family members, including that as well. And also, when I was growing up, I never knew what transgender was. I only knew what gay was. I never seen any transgenders, and it took me years to see that I was actually transgender. I wasn't gay. I thought I was feminine gay, but I actually wasn't. I was actually truly transgender. I wasn't gay. So I think a lot of people need to explain what transgender is. You know, like, I feel like I was often talking to friends of mine, and they say they're gay, but I think they're really transgender. I don't think they're gay, and you know, they're just they feel like it's worse for to come out as transgender than it is to come out as gay.
Yeah.
Like, there's no one explaining the difference between transgender and gay.
Yeah, transgender is an issue with gender identity. It's nothing to do with
Yeah.
sexuality. Like people, remember I was saying earlier on about particular terminology and you don't even always mean it wrong. Like I've often heard people saying stuff like, and you can't believe it sometimes that people talk like this, but they genuinely are nice people. I know them personally. They don't actually care if I've got a boyfriend or something else, but it's how do you say things could affect a less strong person or somebody my age. They say stuff like, oh, look, it's one thing being gay. Look, that's just loads of people are gay nowadays. To say it like this, like there wasn't always the same amount of people that was gay. It was just not as many people talked about it. But like, oh, when people are just wanting to change now to become a woman or something, like that's just going too far. Like it's a choice. Like it's like something they can just, oh, I won't do that, or I'll just do that this week. Like I fancy changing my gender. Like, people just don't understand what somebody has to go through. Like, we've had to come out as gay, right? We come out as gay and then we leave it there and we move on with our lives. If you're transgender, you've got to do the coming out. You've got to possibly like go down like a medical route, surgery, counseling, the amount of stuff that somebody who's transgender has to come out, like, and has to go through, that nobody would just do it for the sake of it and just because they don't care. It's something that causes obviously so much internal upset or unhappiness or discomfort or like with your own identity. Like people really need to tap into that side of it and be more empathetic and understanding that like this is the biggest thing a person can do physically. You're changing everything biologically about yourself. Like obviously you felt a particular way inside. Your soul was that of the gender you've always wanted to be. I firmly believe that. I firmly believe that because I was told my whole life my sexuality is it natural or whatever, and I know deep in my heart I'm not harming anyone. So I definitely believe you can be born with the soul of something that you might not look like physically, but you've always felt a particular way.
May I speak for a second, please? Basically, when I was very young as a little boy, my family, my cousins were growing up around me, and I was very feminine. Like I used to put on makeup. I was only a child. I knew nothing. No one taught me to do it. And my cousins actually years later, when I did come out as transgender, he said, we didn't know you were. We just thought you were gay, but because you put on makeup. I said, but they said you were very feminine as a child.
Yeah.
And
Ruby, you taught me how to plait hair when you were a child.
And now you've gone and shaved it all off, James.
I didn't realise it. Have you known each other from when you've been younger then? I didn't actually realise that.
We're cousins.
We're related. We're cousins.
Oh, I didn't even know that. Sorry, I didn't know that.
Well, actually, we might bring Oein in for a second. I'm aware that Oein is happy to stay quiet in the corner.
Because I never stopped talking, that's why.
Don't worry about it, Hughie. That's what we're here to do, is to talk.
I think we're bringing up very important points. I think especially when people talk around, especially mental health, we talk about suicide. We don't often talk about self-harm, be it through behaviours or substance abuse, which has a lot of like short-term and long-term consequences. And we also talk about the idea of the risks that we have and pressures that we put upon ourselves, breaking that cultural template, which is both internal and external. Externally, we're told who and what we should be. And internally, we're told who we should be. So when we don't live up to those templates, that can lead to a lot of pressures, from the people around us as well as within ourselves. And also, I think that sometimes that as a community that so often experiences isolation, like accommodation, social mobility, kind of finances, is that when we do experience mental health struggles, and I think most people do experience struggles one way or the other, it's not struggles in isolation. It's also because there's societal discrimination, there's isolation, there's expulsion, there's rejection. So it's not just as if it's because this person's LGBT. They're LGBT amongst all these other things that we might consider issues or just events that happen in our lives. And I also just like to say as well, because I know it comes a lot up in spaces that I've been in, especially with trans kind of people, that the bioessentialism is an important part of every trans experience. Not everybody has to go through a medical procedure. It can just be just identity unto itself. I think that's a conversation we all seem to have, because similar ways that there is no actual one way to be a traveller. Now, we like to think this is what travellers do, and we spend our entire lives rethinking that. Because even at the moment, there's Thomas McCann who's doing his PhD, and he's a traveller man himself, and he runs the Traveller Counselling Service. His PhDs are on internalised prejudice from the community, and how many people, including activists, are totally unaware that we're running off a template that doesn't even come from us, because we still have this idea of I'm feminine because I associate these actions with women, when in fact who decided what was feminine and masculine in the first place? Like it's a social con. It's just an attribution that they've gone, actually, maybe you're not feminine, or maybe not masculine, maybe just you, and this is how you want to express your sense. And that's how I feel as a traveller. I think in my little head that I am the most traveller of all travellers, right? Because this is the only way I know how to be a traveller. So when people start coming up with, well, you can't be, you're not really a traveller because you're gay, you're kind of going, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I go and I green eyes as well, like that's counting me, I don't know. So I think we start having those conversations regarding less so pushing back, but more so kind of going, I don't have a problem with me. I think your problem is actually with your version of me. And you know what? That's nothing to do with me.
Are you a poet? That's a very great line.
No, it's true. I agree with that. It makes perfect sense.
Owen, can I just say something there? Something that you just mentioned about we associate certain things with women, like with being feminine and this, that, and the other.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of that is down to the toxic masculinity within the traveller community in the first place, because we're brought up like that in a way.
Yeah, and it goes back to what we're talking about emotions as well. That's because of toxic masculinity.
And it's not just travellers though. Like, we live in a horrendous patriarchal society that diminishes anything that isn't male, tall, strong, pale. You know? And so it's just that we've manifested and dealt with it differently because we've less resources around us. Now that doesn't count. It doesn't mean that we have a lot of shit to do, because my God, we do. But it puts into context of why it's happening, but also makes us more aware of going, we all know what's happening and we all talk about all these issues that are happening. We need to start identifying what people can do to start fixing it. That doesn't put the pressure on us fixing it. You know, because sometimes people say, tell us how to fix it and we'll help you fix it. And I go, well, I don't actually want to do that work for you, because I'm not here at the moment causing half of these problems. Like, I can be a better ally, I can be more aware, be more educated, but the vast majority of these energy and work may not entirely be on us as individuals, but us as part of a collective. So there's issues that happen within the travel community that, my God, we need to deal with and start dealing with soon.
Yeah.
Also, I think as a wider community, because I think sometimes certain people look at yourself as well. Things ain't all rosy in the garden.
So do you mean, Owen, it's like gender stereotyping in society in general? Blue is for boys, pink is for girls, sort of thing. And we're all kind of brainwashed into what we are programmed and conditioned to believe. That's everyone. That's not just travellers. I do understand.
But it becomes more concentrated and more deliberate and more pressured within the travel community, because people have lost their roles in society. People are told they're based on their gender binary purposes. People are reduced to stereotypes. So when that's your only identity, you fight viciously to keep that, because you don't want to lose that.
Yeah, I do understand.
Rules. Who made these rules? Because if they're rules, like, it's a weird game we're playing.
Although
I do understand,
although I do think that the gender norms within the traveller community, they are a lot more extreme. If you look at like a lot of young lads within the community, they're all brought up to do boxing, football, things like that. And then if you look at a lot of women, they're all brought up to cook, clean, and do things like that, get married at a young age and all things like that. So I think the gender norms, they are a lot more extreme for us.
Yeah, but they're also extreme in majority of ethnic backgrounds or religious backgrounds. Muslim families, Irish Catholics 25 years ago, if a woman was raped, she was thrown into a home because she would be married then and no longer a virgin, even though she didn't consensually even have sex. Yeah, so there's gender stereotyping all over the world, but all ethnic backgrounds, no one can argue it's not worse, because it's 10 times worse if you're a traveller.
And that's that's the compression of identities, but also, and I know, Martin, kind of, you have your own template to follow, but for instance, going, when it comes to boxing, right? I don't like boxing in the sex, right? I think, like, people want to do a sport, it's fine. But if people check their own experience of boxing, how much was boxing is it being taught by you, experienced by people around you, was actually about the sport or about the ability to protect yourself and project yourself as a personal strength?
It was about the ability to protect yourself.
Yeah, exactly. So we talk often about boxing. In fact, we can say, actually, no, you live in a society that you're going to feel intimidated. You're going to feel like you have no strength. You don't have the ability to make decisions. You're not a person of the social class.
Yeah, you're brainwashed into that. You're told you have to do this to say good fight.
Well, I think sometimes it's, rather than brainwash, it's like going, people don't have the tools of other ways or faith in how other ways to protect them. Because I know tomorrow morning, if my father had to ring the shades, the Gardaí and guards, the police and stuff, he wouldn't have very distinct trust that they will fulfill their duties. Because
definitely, yeah, and that's a problem.
There's a lot more complications there.
Actually, just let me jump in there, because that's I want to bring that point. I want to focus now on that point.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Tell me what your experiences of trust around services like the Gardaí, like doctors, like schools, like things like that. Tell me, where are you at with that? Do you have trust in them? Why don't you have trust in them? Like, why do you have trust in them? Just discuss.
I think it all goes right back to the same. Do you know what? It's weird enough. The same answer for this is the same answer for everything we've been saying. Is the same way we're saying there's a lot of people, whether you want to say brainwash, whatever terminology you want to use, there's a lot of people that thinks that all guards would be against them, that no teacher would want to teach them, that they'll never get a job. I had some friends growing up, travellers, very intelligent. Like, there was one boy in particular, he was so smart. Like, he was always way above us when it came to reading when we was little. He was always like 2-3 years ahead of him when it came to all of that. And I'll never forget when we got to about 15, he went to Travellers only secondary school, which has now been closed down, and thank Jesus for that, because there was nothing proper done in it. It wasn't ran how a school should be ran or whatever.
A Travellers specific school?
Yeah, it was a Travellers specific school.
There was loads of them, like St. Kevin's and everything in Gr8. Oh, and I'm not even sure
St.
that
Thomas's. Yeah, there's St. Thomas's in Dublin. It was despicable.
And St. Kevin's and Gr8, which I only think closed last year. I only think that closed last year.
Yeah, but Martin, listen to this. St. Thomas's in Dublin, they didn't have to do any of the normal protocols when it comes to school. So, like, they always got extra help, assumed that they needed extra help, right? I don't know why that's assumed. That's an idea in society anyways, the travellers are undereducated, so it might go back to that. And any 13-year-old, if they're getting to go home from school at 2 o'clock when the norm to leave secondary school at 5, like, it doesn't matter if you're a traveller. It doesn't matter if you're a traveller or not. You're not bloody going to school if you don't have to go. There's no uniforms. There's no normal routine. It's like there's so much more leeway because these people don't need as much education, sort of thing. And any young kid is reared like that, or taught that, or that message kind of put in front of them, they will always take advantage of it. If we all could have kept off school, we all would have done it. Let's be honest, not play like the Noble card. None of us would have went to school as kids if we could have got away with it, right? But that's just in general. But that young boy said to me, well, he's my age now, but when we were about 14, he said, what's the point of me going to college or something because nobody give me a job because I'm a traveller? And that's not fair to say that about all of society either. So it goes back to that whole thing where we're all conditioned with particular messages. So we're all meant to feel a particular way. But with boxing, James, I actually think that everyone in society, I think in the school curriculum, you should have to do boxing or do some sort of defense sport to protect yourself. But with travellers, they're not always put into it because it's an achievement. I know you got high profile travellers that try to insinuate that and say that, oh, there's loads of travellers that win Olympic medals and all. Right, okay. 9 times out of 10, you put into it so when you grow up, you can go out boxing and fighting for your family because that's what men have to do. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And we are taught that. And when you're a boy who doesn't relate to that, it's a very hard way to grow up because it's not just about boxing. It's about talking about your feelings. It's about if you like makeup, wear makeup, following passions that you like, getting a career that you like, having the kinds of friends that you want to have. It spreads right across your whole life. This toxic masculinity does.
Mm-hmm.
Who's got the gossip crying?
Oh, that's my house. That's my house. I'm in my sister's house. Look, lovely Peppa Pig.
Suits you, James.
James, I thought you painted that wall for you. I didn't want to bring it up.
Oh, definitely. No, this is the child's room.
Pink is my favourite colour. Look at my cushions on my bed.
Well, they're unreal, dog.
Okay, so I tell you, look. Okay, yeah. So moving towards the other stuff. Then, we were talking there a minute ago about toxic masculinity. Would you think that alone is the reason why LGBT travellers suffer more from poorer mental health? Because we were talking about the statistics a while ago about travellers, they're 6 times more likely to commit suicide. Well, it's actually worse for LGBT travellers.
Oh God, yeah.
So would you see a correlation between the fact that there's toxic masculinity, or would you see it more that we're traditionally very religious, very Christian, or Catholic, which directly says that homosexuality or anything or anything that isn't straight is wrong?
Yeah, there's definitely a link. I think that more travellers suffer mental health who are LGBT, or even girls who doesn't want to probably live a particular lifestyle that's traditional, didn't get married young, sex outside of marriage. There's a lot of revenge porn in the traveling community as well.
Oh,
You
yeah.
go on these Facebook pages with all of the shame pages, and there's even an audience for it. Some of these traveller shame pages, as they're called, they're actually called that, have 40 and 50,000.
Disgusting, and we're going.
There's about 50,000 followers on them, and the only videos that they share is men and women screaming and fighting at the cameras. Sometimes not all of them are wrong. Sometimes they're sad enough for what to believe in, and because something bad has happened to them. But again, they're stereotyped as aggressive because they're travellers, they can't win. And a lot of these pages share revenge porn pictures of girls because guys have this thing in their head where it's like I know girls that's had to have sex with boys multiple times because the boy was going to out them after the first time. Like, it's so bad, and it never gets talked about. And so there's a huge link to suicide and that, because I've seen it personally. I'll never forget a girl and her sister, they both of them killed themselves because there was topless pictures put them on Facebook. Can you imagine like what has happened in those girls' lives, that they were led to feel so paranoid that, like, I mean, that should upset anyone, but to the point where you want to kill yourself because you think your life is so badly ruined and you've kind of shamed your whole family and you've gone against everything that your culture says you should do, that you kill yourself. Can you imagine how they must have felt in those moments? And there's nobody standing up for this. It's not part of any program you see. Nobody talks about it in the media. None of these organizations discuss it. There's no traveller woman that was...
We actually we've done a lot around it in the last 12 months actually, because I called out one of them on Instagram last year, and we got all of the traveller organizations behind it. They were all taken down. In fact, once I highlighted it, they got 13, this is no lie, 13 different shame pages up on Instagram where they were sharing explicit images without
disgusting.
Without the consent of people, and sometimes they were minors. And the worst thing is, there's this notion that, you know, if somebody shares an intimate image of you, that you're dirt. It's not.
No.
There's absolutely no problem with you having an intimate image of you. If that's what you want to do, and if
that's your choice.
Yes, but the second somebody shares it, the dirt is on them, because they're actually breaking the law. They're breaking the law.
Honestly, it should be illegal. It should be illegal.
It is illegal. It's illegal.
Within the Irish sphere now, we have legislation. I'm not sure about England, but now we do, because there's a lot of said about like the social status of people, power. Revenge porn does come with consequences now, because like lack of consent is an issue. Yeah. But across Europe, it's something that we actually really need.
But doesn't it fall under GDPR as well?
It does, but the consequences of GDPR are usually financial. But I think the damage that's done for a lot of people with revenge porn is far more significant.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because how do you get it off the internet? You can't get it off the internet. If you can arrest someone, but unless you're married into the royal family, you don't have the power to get rid of this. When it's online, it's online. And some of these people, genuinely, their lives is ruined because of it. And nobody, I don't care what you are, if you're body image positive, sex positive, whatever you want to be, you be it. I'm sick to death of that inside society in general anyways, the slut shaming culture and whatever. But it's, again, like we said, with gender stereotypes, homophobia, transphobia, it's so much worse when it comes to certain backgrounds. Slut shaming is. It's worse in the tribal community. It's worse for Muslims. It's worse for Catholics. It is worse.
Yeah, and I think, and I know from the, actually, you know what we need to really acknowledge as well is that this is my first time, because for years and years, like especially in the public forums, and as also this is being recorded, is that when we talk about LGBT travellers, we usually just talk about cisgender young men. And so I'm actually really delighted to see you here today, because that makes such a difference, like the perspective and the journey and the difference in kind of the battle that is there is very neat, it's what needs to be identified. But I do think as well when it comes to religious identities, and Mark would know myself and my family, and I would be as pagan as the hills. At the same time, I'm an out gay man. I've campaigned for the autonomy of women with their own rights and marriage equality. And I have sat on the council of the the parish of travelling people at both times, because sometimes people expect you not to be welcome. Other times you make yourself welcome, which means that I have the right to be in the space as much as you do. And you want to get rid of me, you'll have more of a problem. But so I think religious identity is very important to me and my family, especially the other generations. But the flexibility on it, because if you look at most of religious interactions around travellers, and especially around sites, it's the divine feminine. it's the goddess structure that most people are associated with. Jesus gets a look in, how he wave now and again, but most people, it's the Virgin Mary, it's it's a whole different movement. And I do think as people of religious faith, our interpretation and engagement with the official Roman Catholic structures has a far more subtlety to it, and a bit of openness to it. Now, that's something I think we should be encouraging people. And the only difference is that we have weaponized that to such a degree that we use it to punish and harm people rather than showing that there's a different way to be and express who they are.
Okay. I suppose. Okay. So the next question that I want to bring up, which is a little bit outside of the whole LGBT area, because we're more than just LGBT. We're traveller as well. So let's excuse me. Let's talk a little bit about that. One of the things I wanted to find out was how closely aligned are we to some of the old traditions or what is perceived to be traditions. Like, for example, I'm going to ask you all a question now, some of the negative stuff that you might see in the media, and we're going to talk about the media representation as well in a little bit. But for now, I'll just ask you all a question. What is your take on, are you supportive of, or would you think that parts of our tradition needs to change? Like, for example, sulky racing on main roads. What's your opinion on that?
I don't personally care what anybody else, what other people does and what their hobbies are. Once obviously don't cause other people problems.
Well, on the main road, for example.
Yeah, well, so regardless if you're a traveller or not, you shouldn't be able to stand up and do something that is dangerous for others, and call it a hobby or a tradition or something like that. This is where we have the problem, Martin. It's like people living a life where they travel around. I don't think that it's right to impose it. Like in Britain now, didn't they try and bring forward
the policing bill?
Yeah, right. I don't agree with that, but I half agree with the opinion around it. Like right now, just because you're a traveller doesn't mean you should be allowed to leave school early and say it's part of my culture. Just because you're a traveller doesn't mean you should be allowed to do sulky racing on main roads. We live in a different world today. And it's dangerous for others and there's no need for it. You should go do it somewhere else. Go do it on a track or whatever. There's loads of places that, have horses and whatever, and you can do that. Or do it in a field or something like that. The same with the travelling around. Let's say, if we're going to talk about travellers' traditions, I feel like when there's a piece of land there, like in many countries, that, it's unoccupied, it's owned by the state. If people are moving in and out of these places and they're not causing any problems, they should be allowed to do that. And I do think that there should be probably more of a vetting process or whatever for these types. I know it's very hard to have the manpower in countries with millions of people to do this, but I don't think it's fair to typecast everyone as like leaving rubbish behind or causing problems, or you need to integrate more into society. Because if you can come over from Asian countries and build mosques in Christian countries, and schools, we don't have religious schools anymore. There's no new ones opening. They're all educated together. And when you ask us about integration, it's about inclusion and all of that. When you have that, when you have people that are Muslims in Britain, and you can Google this if you don't believe me, statistically, they do open conversations and they ask, do you think that it's right to talk about gay relationships and gay sex, not in sex education and in what's that called? SBHE, where they talk about social topics and everything. And everyone has said, no, I don't want my kids to hear about gay marriage, gay sex and all of this. If you can do all of that in a Christian country that same-sex marriage is legal, you should be allowed to be a traveller and still carry on traditions and culture that you feel suited to you. I don't personally want to live a particular traditional lifestyle, and it shouldn't be imposed upon me. And so many people out there do impose it on you, which is what we were talking about with that suppression and whatever else. But there's the other side to it. If you do want to live a lifestyle where you have particular cultural beliefs, you should also be allowed to do that when it's not affecting anyone else. But when it is affecting people, like doing sulky racing on a main road, all you're doing is giving people words to say to all travellers and typecast all travellers. You shouldn't be doing it. It's against the law. We shouldn't be breaking any laws.
I suppose, Ruby, what's your thoughts on that? Is there any parts of the tradition or the culture that you think should change and move with the time? Because look, let's face it, we all know that as an LGBT person, we need that to change, within our culture.
Evolution.
I just think I think leave the travellers with their tradition, but they do need to start accepting people that are different to them. Like we're all raised as travellers. I was raised in a site all my life, and I am like my family are traditional travellers. So is James's, and everybody else is whoever lives in sites and houses. Doesn't matter where you come from. But I was basically a person myself. I was brought up in a site, and there is things that I do, part of the culture things like tradition. Even though I'm transgender, but I still kind of follow up on my tradition as well. Also, do you get me?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's a great answer, James.
Martin, sulky racing isn't really a big issue over here in England, so I don't really think it's something that I can speak on.
I think it's really in Ireland mostly.
Well, that's interesting. So that part of the tradition hasn't made it over to the UK.
I don't see a lot of it on the roads in Bristol anyways. Don't get me wrong now, every now and again you will see a horse at a McDonald's or something, but I don't see it as like a big issue.
Can I say one thing I think it's a bit interesting though? It's weird because in Blackpool where I lived, I feel like Blackpool's been forgotten about in the whole of the UK because of how it is. I mean, 90% of the jobs are cash in hand, and that's not even what you see these days. So in Blackpool, but in Ballymum where I'm from, in Finglas, there's actually a lot of stables that travellers haven't even got anything part of. The stables have been around since as long as I can remember. And all of these people that aren't even travellers also trot their horses on the road and like bring them out to exercise them and stuff. So I'd say in Blackpool, every street had a garden with horses in the front of it, and they weren't always travellers. It was just, I think maybe even...
Oh, like, that's common over here as well, Hughie.
Yeah, there's so many people that are travellers in particular towns and neighbours where it might be culturally like more people have had it, so it becomes more normal. Like their uncles might have had horses and they've got a horse or whatever. So it can happen in every background. But so many people in Ballymun and Finglas jog their horses on their sulkies, and the kids will be sat beside them, not even strapped in or anything, and they're not all travellers. So it happens in a lot of backgrounds. It's not just travellers.
Yeah,
I suppose the way I'm phrasing that is, it as a traveller, we're the ones who gets blamed for it. So that's why I'm posing the question to ye. What is your actual thought? Because we never get asked. We actually never get asked. So far, we already have James, who doesn't have an opinion on it because he's not been exposed to it. So it's not part of his tradition. It's not part of your tradition, Hugh. You're against it. Ruby, you just want, you think the travellers should do what they want. So that's 1 out of 3 of you. Owen, we're going to go into you now. That's what I'm trying to say. The reason why I'm asking the question is the media would portray it as...
that we all do it.
Exactly. But we're never actually asked our own points of opinion.
Can I just quickly add something, Martin? If we wanted to keep on to certain traditions and whatnot, I then think that we should be reinstating like educational lessons about tinsmithing and learning our language and everything like that. I think there's other important aspects of our traditions, and it's not just down to sulky racing.
Do you think that it should be part of school? Do you know how we do RE lessons and all? And that's also been a lot of people thinks it's not important anymore because there's people with different religious backgrounds in our schools now. So, but apparently that's okay. But it's all right to make everything illegal that any traveller does because we're all criminals, obviously.
I do think
worked on. Oh, okay.
Sorry, I do think Gypsy Roma Traveller history should be taught in schools. Yeah,
I think so. I do as well. So there's just more understanding.
Well, actually, I'll tell you what, we'll ask Owen to jump in, but just to answer both of your questions and to alleviate your concerns, it's actually being thought at the moment. It's been put onto the Irish curriculum for the schools. So
but Martin, when I was in school, it was in one of the books, but there wasn't a lot on it.
No, there was only 3 pages. 3 pages.
I don't think that's happening in England. I don't think that's happening in England.
We're currently here in Ireland, in the Irish context. We're currently working on that via the. Which is originally sponsored by Senator Keller and now will be championed by Senator Eileen Flynn, which is the Travel Culture and History and Education Bill. And it's a long-term process because it's not just about including travellers in like a topic around history or biology.
Yeah.
It's actually in a pervasive way going, we've always been a part of society, so it's not as creating new history, it's going making sure our history and our subjects are more reflective of the reality we all share. So that is,
and it has to be taught in the right way.
Yeah, and we're wonderfully blessed because we have like Dr. Hannah McGinley, who's now working with the NCCA, which is an actual curriculum council of Ireland, the Assessment of Ireland, who's actually leading out in that. So I've great faith in it. But I do think that information.
Just to explain what the NCCA is, they're the ones who choose what goes on the school curriculum, what is taught in the schools. So that's the level at which we're making changes at the moment, or suggesting changes. So it is going in a good direction over here. But I'm interested to go back to you, James. You mentioned that it's not being taught in the UK, which is strange because the UK recognised traveller ethnicity long before the Irish government did.
As I'm aware, no, it's not happening in schools over here, as I'm aware. But I do think there was a few talks with certain groups and that they are putting it to whoever they need to put it to bring it into the curriculum.
Okay.
But
Well,
I think people assume that in Britain is so much more liberal than Ireland anyways. Again, it goes back to stereotyping because Ireland's a Catholic country or a smaller population or whatever anyways. But can I ask you all a question, because in case you're going to be moving on to something else, do you think that if this gets included in the curriculum and the education system, that we could end up with another problem that could be more people will typecast and assume travellers to be the same because they're being taught that travellers are a cultural and traditional background. So people will assume, well, they almost live like the same or whatever. And then as soon as you get a negative experience with somebody, it's sort of like that effect you already have when...
Well, can I answer that one? Can I answer that one then with an idea? If it's been taught in schools, well then, as an aside to have been taught in schools, the students will be taught that this is the way travellers used to be. This is the way travellers were in the 80s. This is the way they were in the 90s and the way they are in the 2000s, and how they have developed over time. And there are certain things within the culture that still remains, but by and large, we're no different than the rest of the students.
Yeah, and generationally things has changed like every background.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, and I think just before kind of we move the spot around the kind of sulky racing, if anyone knows me in any great detail, knows that I am petrified of horses. I have an absolute phobia of horses. So when we come to
traveller with equinophobia.
I know. I think when it comes to sulky racing, we need to look at transparency, fairness, and adequation of resources. We have here in Ireland a thing called road bowling, in which local communities will shut down roads in order for people to do road bowling. Gardays are involved, community centres involved, communities. So we know that actual utilising roads for different sports is something that can happen, but there has to be a buy-in and an openness of it. But when it comes to road safety, which often sulky is associated with going, I am all for increased safety. But we need to be very sure is that is reduction of horses in public spaces, a reduction of traveller culture in those spaces. Because sometimes if you look at the legislation and look at the policies, it's actually removing us from spaces.
Yeah, basically, I don't agree with the horse, with the horse situation, because it is very unsafe. And personally, none of my family does it, or I've never did it myself. But I wouldn't really be bothered about that. It's not really a tradition, really.
Yeah, and you know what? I would be the exact same way as Ruby there now, because and just to use your example, Owen, you mentioned about bowls and how they close. They're usually boring roads that's been used over decades in the same.
I wouldn't be calling for Jesus. No one should be going down like an M50 on a horse. But I am saying that they are some places are open. Like here in Dublin, we do have a sulky racing kind of space. But so I suppose being very aware that a lot of the time this narrative isn't really about safety. It isn't about horse care. It isn't really about what we're doing. I mean, even a couple of weeks ago in Kilkenny, they were trying to dezone spaces in Kilkenny city and county to be horse free. There wasn't really anything to do with actual movement of horses, because if someone has harmed a horse, the law should kick in there going harm for horse, and all animals should be protected. Something very important to me. But what it was actually an attempt to reduce traveller presences. So I think we need to be very aware, is this actually about the animal and the sport and safety, or does these legislation policies have another trend behind them? Because some of them are exactly what we need. Other of them are incredibly nefarious and need to be challenged.
I think there's definitely situations where the culture is trying to be whitewashed out of certain areas. But I would see maybe a solution to because it is a problem. The more cars we have on the roads, the more dangerous it becomes. And you can't have two sulky drivers driving up a dual carriageway. Or you just can't. It's not feasible. It's not safe.
In today's society,
no, it's not. Well, I suppose just I'll make this point, and then I'm going to open it up to the next part of the discussion to everyone. But the point I've been making for years is that if we went with a social enterprise model, which is basically get the government behind us, get the community behind us, both led by travellers, or even in a partnership model, traveller and non-traveller. Get one of the old disused greyhound tracks somewhere in the country. Get funding behind it, open it up, and even get like courses around veterinary care, courses around ferrying the horses, courses around taking care of your horses, how to train them, and to use the track then, and maybe set up a race meeting once a month or even turn it into a festival once a year and get all the travellers, get all the settled people to come together. Because as you said a while ago, a few of you have said, it's not just travellers that do sulky racing. So if we found a place to bring everyone together and to regulate it, to make sure that the horses are looked after, and to teach the young travellers how to take care of the horses, then I think that's a way forward where we can still keep the culture, but it becomes something bigger, if you know what I mean.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
definitely.
agree.
It's a good
I
idea.
agree.
Okay, well, I'll tell you what, we'll move on to the next part, the fun part, and we're going to lead off with you, Hughie, because this is your area, but it's all of our area because we've all been affected by it. But I suppose you've been, you've been successful in this area.
Which one is it?
Media representation for travellers. Where are we at with that? What are your thoughts on it? How are we represented? Are we represented fairly? Are we underrepresented? Should we have more faces on screen or more faces behind the camera putting other faces on the screen? So what do you think? What's your take on that?
Right. So I think that in general, there's not a lot of travellers that are. There's probably no reason for it, but there's just not a lot of travellers that probably speak about the issues we're talking about right now. There's probably never been a conversation by a group of travellers filmed the way we've just done right now, really put out there about the topics we're discussing. So I feel like there's not a lot of travellers at all that talks out about, you know, internal stigma within the travelling community. And I think that it's a huge part. I think the main part and the key part to really help and move forward and change these stereotypes about travellers is publicly, because what we need to start doing is start pushing more and more about diversity and individuality within the travelling community, and that needs to become the narrative and the concept that gets spoken about. Now, the problem is, Martin, is that because there's such an opinion that all travellers are the same, or a lot of people likes these negative TV shows and negative stories because they sell so much.
Yeah.
I had a producer, right, of a major production company in Ireland that I had spoken to about possibly doing a documentary about internal stigma in the travelling community. And we got right to the very end, and right before it got signed off to make the programme, the channel just didn't want to take that risk and fund a documentary like that, because documentaries about travellers are so commercially viable, but they're always the ones that are stereotypical, the ones that are shocking, the ones that have the big wedding dresses and the fighting and you know, getting evicted off of land, and just like all of the really negative and shocking stuff that I suppose sells all of the media. But the problem is that when we already have an opinion of travellers as negative in society, and then this is the only type of representation they really get, it continues on that narrative and idea from generation to generation in society that travellers are the same, or there's a negative idea on them. And when you have high profile travellers that never speak up and talk about these problems, it's sort of, you very much feel like at times you're fighting a battle on your own. There's times when I'm talking to a journalist, or I'm talking on the radio, or I'm doing a podcast, and I've done a lot of stuff like this lately, and I've done a show on Virgin Media about it, and I always talk about stuff like this all the time, but you can feel very alone in doing it. There doesn't really seem to be many people doing it doesn't seem to be that thing that sells the most for a program or a journalist. If a journalist had a choice to put on a story of a traveller doing something really well, or a traveller breaking into someone's house, they're immediately going to jump onto that story, and the headline will be Traveller Man, even though his ethnicity has nothing to do with the crime. They'll make it everything about that because they know there's that negative stereotype of travellers, and as soon as people see that, they'll buy it and read it, because the subject of travellers in the media, by their own admission, by people that make programmes, by journalists and stuff themselves, is a very commercially viable subject. Gypsy weddings used to get 10 million viewers in Britain. That's what X Factor used to get. Like, it's such a, and all that, and anything that was on it was for entertainment purposes, but the public doesn't take it as entertainment purposes. You take it as educational, because subconsciously they see it as a documentary, and they genuinely think, I'm getting an insight into the travelling community, and it's this special world, when not all travellers know one another, not all travellers live the same. Like, there's so much individuality in the travelling community that nobody ever talks about and never gets represented, but millions and millions of people are watching these shows and reading these stories and following, like, there's a girl on TikTok called Kathleen McCann. She's a young girl. She's got 500,000 followers on TikTok, and you want to see how stereotypical her content is. She's become popular because she apparently shows and talks about traveling culture and traveling way of life that, you know, so many people want to know about, and it's so important to tell people. Everything she says is typecasting. It actually comes from a nice place. I can tell the girl means no harm. She's a young girl, but she doesn't ever say this is my opinion or this is my experience.
Yeah. She generalizes.
She generalizes,
Okay.
and so many people follow her because they find it interesting. It's like, I'm getting this.
What age is she? What age is she?
She only looks about 19. She's married, and the way she talks about, you know, marriage and how young girls are, and she says that all travelers live. She says this, watch her videos, a high-end lifestyle, like the average present for a traveler girl for their birthday is a Rolex watch. And people, look, there's travelers that can't afford to feed themselves. There's travelers that, like, they're just like all backgrounds. There's all kinds of people that are travelers, just like everywhere. But for some reason, society doesn't know this, because anytime travelers get a table to talk about it, you never talk about it. It's never the concept for the show. It's never the concept for the book. It's never what the journalist talks about. It's never what Tyson Fury talks about. It's never what any of these high profile travelers ever talk about. And I'm sick and tired of it, because until people start talking about what we're talking about now, nothing will ever change, including racism towards travelers, because we haven't proved that there's individuality in the traveling community yet, because nobody talks about it. Nobody seems to talk about that.
I'm conscious that Ruby, you've been quiet. I'd love to hear, and Hughie, everything you said, 100% true. 100%.
Thank you.
100% true. I'm agree.
Yeah,
it irritates me. I'm so passionate about it.
Let's be down the box.
Yeah. But I'm conscious that we've passed the hour mark, and I'd like to get a little bit more from Ruby, because whether we all know it or not, this is the first time a trans traveller has spoken in a public space in Ireland, in around the media. So this is a big deal for everyone in this conversation. And I'd love for Ruby just to, I suppose, highlight some of the areas that you would like to see change in the future to make it easier for the next generation.
Well, I'd like people to know the difference between gays and transgenders. Do you get me? Because a lot of boys that might be transgender could think that they're gay because they're feminine and because they like men. Do you get me? And that really needs to be highlighted, personally, myself, I think. And also, I've seen a lot of, the factors on, I see a lot of, I get bullied by a lot of traveling girls on TikTok as well also. Like, it's mostly women, traveler women on TikTok that's doing it, not barely any men.
That's because they're jealous, because they're not up to your level.
I think so, but you know what? Actually,
I ignore them. I don't argue back. I do not know the way to none of them. But I think personally myself, I personally think a lot of traveler women are jealous. I define transgender women a threat in the traveler community.
Would you say that you experience more transgender hatred from
towards
traveler
women, towards traveler women than men?
On
TikTok, yeah.
I think that's such a fascinating thing to hear, because that's something that's not talked about. It's not. Because if you notice, traveler men usually get the worst of it. Like, we're usually always seen as the instigators of hatred.
But see what is, Martin? What the problem is, Martin? Women like to have a gay best friend, but they don't support the rest of the transgender community. Like transgenders, they don't want any of them. Like, they don't care about them. But we've a gay best friend, a traveller. Like, I'm a traveller.
I think that's to do with understanding, though. Like we said at the start of this conversation, it's like you understand gays more because now you see more and more. What you see, it's like, what you see, what's normal to you is normal to you. That's what the word normal means. What is normal? It's not. It's whatever you know.
Yeah, but in my TikTok videos, I mention a lot about toxic masculinity and all that. And
big shout out to you. What's your TikTok name? Give it a bit of a plug.
Ruby O'Brien 18.
Ruby O'Brien 18. All right. Anyone listening to this podcast, get over to Ruby O'Brien 18 on TikTok and show the love. And if you see somebody throwing some transphobia at Ruby, will you not just mind and skull drag a bitch? Because you know what? because they're looking for it. But go on, sorry, Ruby.
And stand up for people, because
Yes.
it's all of our responsibility. We're
It
all
is about
responsible to make it a better world. If a kid is being bullied in school, I think it's up to other children to either say something or tell a teacher or tell a parent. We need to start doing that. Just because I'm white doesn't mean that I don't stand up for black people or transgender people or women or whatever. But it is very interesting that you say that we follow you more.
But just I suppose because I'm fascinated in hearing more about the transgender issue. So I'm sorry for cutting across you, Hughie, but
no, I understand.
Do you know what it is? We are so used to owning our spaces that we very rarely get the opportunity to make sure that we need to keep quiet sometimes, because we don't hear enough from transgender travellers.
No.
And if you notice, for most of this interview, I've kept quiet myself because I wanted to hear from you guys. But at the same time, we're coming towards the end of it, and I want something for us to come away with, some words from Ruby herself to tell us. So, okay, Ruby O'Brien 18, TikTok, we're on it, no problem. There you go. Tell us more. I suppose, actually, one question I'd be interested in finding: what was your coming out like? First as a gay, as a gay, and
personally, it was terrible because James knows my family. We're related, and like all my uncles and my aunties and a lot of my cousins stopped talking to me, and I got like bad threats from my family also along with it. But the only one they seemed to accept me was like the girls and my cousins, like some of the girls that were very close to me, and also James. He was also like part of the LGBT himself. And would you believe it? My mother accepts it, like, because she knows I'm older now and things, and she's very, she's very caring and things. But my father finds it hard to understand. Like he doesn't, like, he's very good. He loves me and I love him, obviously. But I don't think it's hard for him also. I understand that part by his situation. Like, it's hard for him to see once was his son transitioned to a woman. It's like, it's hard. Like, I understand that part.
Understand that.
And I have respect for him for that, because to be honest with you, I don't rub it into his face. I don't. That's just me. That's just my personality. I know, like, I just don't rub it into my father's face. I don't rub it into my mother's face. They still call me by my name before the name they named me, and I don't mind that, because in the end of the day, I wouldn't expect them to call me something else when it's hard for them, because it's hard for them. I wouldn't expect them to. If they want to call me the name that I was born by, they can call me that, because in the day they're my mother and father, and it's just not a big deal for them to call me what they call me. Whatever, basically, I wouldn't mind, because they are old fashioned, and they're very, they don't know nothing about that, and that's I understand that part.
So you've kind of found a place that you feel like everybody's comfortable in. It's like, I'll do my thing, and you kind of think whatever you want to still think of me. Can I ask you a question, though? Because I think that's interesting and very noble of you to do that. But I think, for example, if I were to compare it to my situation, I now don't think that it's right if my parents didn't understand more about gay people 4 or 5 years, 5 years on from when I came out. I understood it more at the time, like how you're saying it. But say, for example, if I had a boyfriend, even though like I've already had a boyfriend and met him and stuff, but say I met a new boyfriend, I wouldn't, if I felt like I still couldn't introduce them to a boyfriend 5 years later because they'd still feel uncomfortable, I then would feel like they're wrong. I feel like that wouldn't be me rubbing it into their face. That would be me being myself. And you've had enough time to understand.
Yeah, but my mother...
just had something to that. Sorry, I just had something to that. Hughie, I've been out since I think I was 18, I think, when I came out, and I'm 23 now, 24 this year, and I've still never introduced a man to my family.
But do you think that that's right, though, James? Because if it's still like the UK... It
that's
might not be
my
as hard
own,
as...
like, that's my own decision. That's like what makes me most comfortable. I like, it's more comfortable for me to keep that part of my life separated.
Secret.
But if you were straight, you'd introduce a girlfriend. So this is part of. Do you not think, though, that you're probably making it worse in your head?
Yeah, I understand what Kiwi's coming from, because I basically, Kiwi, my family don't mind me being with somebody, but they don't want me rubbing in the transgender part into their face. But
that shouldn't be seen as rubbing it into the face. So I get to begin with, you don't understand.
But I just feel like I upset them a lot when I do. I just really, I don't know how to explain it really.
I know what you mean. If it works for you individually, but I think overall,
in time it can get better.
And
entirely.
maybe, I think
if-
as well, you've only been out for like less than a year, I think.
Yeah, so it's, you know,
I think
it's
it is
very
still
new.
very fresh, and
Yeah,
eventually they will
that's
come
it,
around to
yeah.
it, and they will
Yeah.
accept
I
you and
understand.
start calling you
Yeah.
by your more accepted name.
Mm.
I understand
That's
that.
And Ruby, can I ask you, because I can understand where you're coming from, by the way.
I get it.
I'm 36 and I still don't have certain conversations with my father.
Yeah.
Not that he has a problem. And if he did have a problem, well, then he'd have a bigger fucking problem. But that's not the point.
Yeah,
The point
I understand that.
But just let me ask this question. Do you ever feel as though, this is to you, Ruby, do you ever feel as though that you have to change your appearance when you're around your parents?
Yeah,
So would you
I do.
would you dress differently on
I would,
purpose?
I would just kind of dress like a black jeans and a black polo neck or something. I wouldn't dress, I wouldn't have any makeup on or anything like that. Like, I'm not on hormones yet, so, you know.
Right, I understand.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
understand.
So there's
It's
still
what
that
works for you.
pressure. There's still that pressure
Yeah.
for you to.
See, I haven't took my hormones yet, so like without makeup anyways, they just see me like they don't, you know, like I don't. I
You
don't
mean
know,
you
I just-
haven't changed physically yet?
physically?
Well,
Yeah.
no, we're not. We won't get into that because I think that's a deeply personal conversation anyway. But
Yeah.
what I'm more interested in finding out is that, because for me, if I'm with a group of gay fellas, I get a little bit more airy and fairy. When I'm around my parents, it's like, go from me to the fool. It's a totally different thing. So I'm interested with the transgender angle. Then is it more amplified? So you don't want to.
I was always very feminine. I can't hide my feminine side. And personally, myself, they know I'm very feminine because before I didn't have to. It wouldn't be a big, like, you know, like I was feminine since I was a child to an adult. Everything, you know, like they just know me as a feminine person, but they don't like. I just don't rub my personal things into their face because they're old-fashioned, and it upsets my mother. So personally, I avoid that situation. But in time to come, it will get better and it'll get easier.
Absolutely, it will.
They'll have to start calling me that name in time. But I'm going to give them this year and probably another year maybe.
Until you feel better, you ease your way into that.
Yeah.
I understand that decision.
You're growing your confidence right now, Ruby.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing.
100%.
Do you think that it's different faces for different places? We've all got a different face no matter where we are. Martin, I don't talk to my father about particular things because we come from two completely different times.
Exactly.
We get that. But I wouldn't, for example, consider me introducing him to a boyfriend, although even if I had a girlfriend and I was straight, there's always a meet the parents story, isn't there? We're all in the same boat. But
well, I suppose, Hughie, can I ask you a question, Hughie? Just on that, because you of course had a very public relationship with Ryan, I think Ryan.
Yeah,
was.
Ryan, yeah.
How did that go? Because like, talk about coming out, like you didn't come out, you kicked the door of the wardrobe down. You're like, hello, you know.
I did. I do think, Martin, if I'm very honest with you, I think that I have some very strong opinions, but I agree with other people's individual choice for them as an individual. Like, I've said that across the board on this whole conversation. But like, I came out, right, for example, I was 21, it was 5 years ago. I came out with a few people I felt comfortable coming out to, so I get the whole what you feel comfortable with. I've never to this day even had a conversation about my sexuality with my father. We've never had a conversation about it. Now, I do think that when I went into Big Brother, one of the reasons why I really didn't care about what I'd done or said in that house was to an extreme degree to what happened with my ex, to how I acted when I was drunk. I really didn't care that I was on camera. And do you know why I think that was? I think that was a defense mechanism to me living my whole life very much worried about what everybody thought, sick to death of being paranoid. I think I subconsciously wanted to shock so badly that I'd never, ever, ever be asked a question again by another person, are you gay? Because that question used to hurt me and pain me so bad, it would ruin my entire day. I was so upset by this truth within me that if I was asked that question, are you gay? It would ruin everything. If I was on a night out, I would just want to go home. I was sick of going on nights out with my friends, whether they be travellers or non-travellers, and been talking to a boy for a few weeks and pretending that I'm sick and I want to go home so that I can go off and meet this boy. I was just sick to death of it. I wanted to go on television and probably subconsciously do something with a boy on TV so that people, if you like it, you like it. If you don't, lump it. That's how I felt. When I went into Big Brother, Martin, I didn't know whether I'd have a home to come home to because I didn't know whether my own father was going to disown me.
Yeah.
But I didn't even look past that. I didn't even look past the show. I could have been gone after a week. They could have kicked me out before I even went in on the first day for medical reasons or whatever else, because you get kept for a week before these reality shows to do all these checks on you. And a lot of people does end up having to leave. And I did not know what my life was going to be like there afterwards. But I do think as well, I understand where the other guys has come from, because if I didn't meet Ryan on television, like I didn't have to introduce Ryan because everybody already knew him. So I think that maybe if I didn't meet Ryan on Big Brother, that would have been the second big thing for me, was going on to Big Brother, saying who I was, and then coming out and meeting that boy eventually and introducing him. I think it was a big help for me, Big Brother was, because I got to come out and go away to the show, and my family could watch me and see that I'm so happy and I'm fine, and they got enough time to process it. They've seen all the support I had. So I do think I've been very lucky. So I've never really had to do that introduce a boy to my parents' story, because they'd already watched them on television, didn't need to meet them. So I've probably had it easier, to be fair. But I think I subconsciously went to them lengths because I was sick and tired of hiding who it was, and nobody else has to. My sister can be straight and nobody cares, or whatever else. So I should be able to be me. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, I totally agree with you. And the thought that when you went on TV to not know you'd have a home to come back to, that's a very real thing for a lot of travellers in a similar situation.
It is,
because that's our immediate thing. We're going to be kicked out, or what are we going to do? And I think that this is why we need to have a network of supports available, because while in your case your father turned out to be a great person and he didn't kick you out,
it doesn't happen in other situations.
Exactly. Some other situations it can get quite violent as well, and that's something that we need to be mindful of, that I suppose we have a certain element of privilege that our parents haven't done the extremes to us. But then again, like, look, for example, there's no lesbian here in this group, and that's quite telling, that there aren't a lot of lesbians who want to speak openly either.
No, it does not.
No, because women get treated. Go on.
I have
James?
one for you.
Differently to men.
I have a lesbian for you, Martin. She's willing to speak to you privately.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh well, so that's fantastic. That's brilliant. So, like, okay, well, thank you very much. That's there you go.
So that goes back to the whole...
No, that'll keep all the feminists off my back now, you see, because I got there's your token woman now. It's like when people do interviews about equality and they have that one token traveller. I've been looking for that one. No, I'm joking. But it is that there aren't many traveller women that come out openly and speak about being lesbian or being transgender or being bisexual or pansexual or all the other things. And that's something I'd love personally in a different capacity. I'd love to explore that more as to why that's the case. I do think there's a certain amount of privilege that men have. We're a bit more confident. But then we have situations then with Ruby today who would have far less privilege than all of us. And we need to be promoting the trans issues, we need to be promoting the female issues, we need to be promoting all the issues. Disability, that's another one. We need that's a massive issue that we just always forget, because it doesn't affect us ourselves. And because we're not affected directly by it, we tend to just not think about it. But
it's called unconscious bias, isn't it?
Well, not even that. I don't think it's that. I think it's the fact that we haven't been educated on it yet. We haven't been exposed to that yet. And I don't think any of us are bad people for not talking about it.
Yeah.
But I think we all need that opportunity to be exposed to it, to talk to somebody in that situation, to learn more, because that's how you get allies, So look, I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to thank you all first of all for coming here.
Thank you very much.
And now Hughie, you have upcoming stuff that you want to talk to us about? You've got a few things in the mix.
Yeah, so, well, I can't tell you what it is, but I am doing another program soon. Remember I was telling you today, I can't say what it is. I go away in about a week's time to do it. And I want to do so much more stuff around what we're talking about now. I am speaking to more people in the media. That I do want to do a lot more interviews and a lot more stuff about this. And a lady who I know who works for a Travellers' Rights organisation is going to include a lot more of these topics in her work. And do you know what I'd really love to do? I've never ever been to any gay pride in my life, but I'd love to actually go with a group of travellers one time. And I would just love for, it would be so brilliant to stand together and including lesbians and stuff, because again, that within the traveller community, I believe sexism is worse than it is to or maybe outside travellers, or it would be for certain religious backgrounds. And again, that just proves the point we've been talking about this whole time.
Exactly. Is
that women are more underrepresented. When you think of gay pride, you automatically think of men in bloody hot pants.
It's not gay pride anymore, actually.
It's, what's it called? Just pride.
It's pride, because yes, pride, because it needs to be inclusive. And but again, you don't know that until somebody tells you that, and that's how you expose yourself to it, and that's how you change, and you make.
You don't even think about it, No. You think of men when you think of pride.
Well, I'll tell you what. For you, James, you're getting more active with Gr8. Is it Gr8 Bristol? You're muted there.
Sorry, yeah, that group has now been constituted and everything, and we're currently looking for funding to get a consultant in to be able to train members of the traveller community, and then we can do other things like educational classes and things like that. We want to start like up a little like coffee group for women and all different little sorts of projects we want to have. We also want to get funding eventually for a family fun day. But I'd also love to ask Hughie one quick question.
1 second. Yeah, go on.
Obviously, you've been in the public eye quite a lot, and you've gained quite a few followers. And Ruby was speaking earlier about hate that she was receiving online. Do you have any advice for young LGBTQ travellers that are going through it, or even just travellers in general?
So you mean like when it comes to abuse online, have I got any advice for anyone? I just think for me as a person that I hit a place when I was 21 when I came out, and I was saying about when I went on Big Brother and why I seemed to kind of not even think about how bad something could be for me. That I just think it's fight or flight within yourself. You have to remember that when people be bad to you, it's a representation of them, not you. Hurt people hurt people. We know that all the time. It's easier said than done to not let it all get to you. But what you need to do is you need to really be strong within yourself, focus on yourself. And when that happens, and when you have a support network around you, things become so much easier. That's why the saying is, it gets better. That's why, like, that's what I said at the start of this. If I felt like I could come home and talk about homophobic abuse I got in school, my childhood would have been so much easier. My teenage years would have been so much easier. Look for the positive, find support, and just remember it's a representation of them and not you, and love who you are as a person. And I promise you now that it will never bother you. It will never bother you. As a human, you're not made of iron, but you look at that person who takes their time to message you abuse because you're gay.
That's true,
and you'll think to yourself, do you know what? Thanks for reminding me I'm gay. I didn't need reminding, but you need help. You need a lot of help, darling. And I'm going to see you later. I'm going to go and take loads of selfies and post them to annoy you because I know you'll be watching them.
Just for badness. That's some good advice.
Can I say something, Ruby? Everything that Hughie said. But can I just ask you, would you be interested in getting yourself on Twitter? Because I think what you'll find on Twitter is thousands of people in a similar situation, maybe not with the traveller angle, but thousands of people willing to help you, willing to give you advice. There's so many supports out there.
I talked to a lot of transgender women already.
And would you be on Twitter?
No, not on Twitter. Mostly Instagram and TikTok, really, and Snapchat, and Facebook.
I would consider even joining Twitter. I just think that your voice is something that'll be very important for people to hear. I truly believe that.
Yeah, that's what I'm going to do.
Well, between myself and James, we can definitely help you with that anyway. But I just think that Twitter needs a voice like Ruby at the moment.
Definitely.
100%. I truly believe that.
That's it.
But okay. So Oein, anything coming up? Anything we should know about? Anything that you want to plug or?
No, I mean, apart from the LGBT National Working Group along with LGBT Ireland are forming the peer support group. So if people are interested, we'll be putting out kind of invitations, because just like today, we have a great need to share these spaces, have these conversations. I know this one was recorded, but just imagine all the understandings we can share with each other. But also I really genuinely want to say that it has been an absolute privilege not only to have this discussion, but also to have it with Ruby. I think we are at a place that we need to be more conscious, and we need to be able to give people more of the platform and space to speak for themselves. So that's me kind of written out. But at the same time, is I just say again, Beanz, thanks for creating the platform, and Ruby, I'm
that's what's here for.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you so much.
Ruby,
thank you, everyone. It was lovely chatting me on.
Is there anything, Ruby, that you'd like to finish on? Anything that maybe a closing message? And you know what? I'm going to have to change now, because I was calling myself the Queen of the Travellers, but I think I have been kicked out of that position.
I'm the Queen. Nobody else. I'm the Queen.
There will be skull dragging on a minute. Is there anything that you'd like? Any little message, or even a message of hope for maybe somebody younger that might be going through something similar?
Basically, if there's anyone that is transgender out there, don't be afraid to lose people, because by right, you're living your life to make you happy, nobody else, you know.
Short and sweet, Ruby. I like it.
And that's perfect. You don't lose friends, you lose haters that were haters from day one.
Exactly. You never lose friends. They were never your friends to begin with if you lost them. But I just want to say, like, on behalf of myself and the rest. Alexa, relax yourself, now, good girl, will you? She doesn't know that one.
That was Winnie.
Mortified. So I just would look on behalf of myself and the whole HazBeanz show. It's been an absolute pleasure. This is a historical day, because, as I said, it's the first time that we've had a space in the media presented by and directed by and produced by Traveller and engaged by all LGBT travellers, and for the very first time, a trans traveller. And I can't, I suppose, overstate how important that is, how important that new voice is. And Ruby, anything that I can do, and I mean this, and James will tell you, I'm a man of my word. Anything that I can ever do to help you, no matter what time of the night or morning it is, if you ever need anything, I'm always there. I genuinely always there.
Thank you, Martin.
But don't try to do me a favor. Don't try to do one better than Marianne, because Marianne will have no problem leaving a scar on you. Guys, thank you so much, genuinely, from the bottom of my heart. It's been an absolute pleasure. I'm going to be doing a follow-up if anyone's interested. I've got new filming gear. I will be doing a little documentary about LGBT Travellers once lockdown and all that ends. I'd love to be able to meet you. I'd love to be able to meet you all in person and to do a video and to have a bit of crack.
I'd like that
so
too.
Maybe walk around your hometown, kind of, and just have a conversation and just have a coffee. I just love to meet you all in person. But listen, God bless, and I hope you all have a lovely day. And thank you so much for giving me your time. Thanks for being on the HazBeanz show.
And thanks, Martin, for having us, and thanks for organising it, because it's so important. And thanks for listening to me waffling on. Thank you.
Thanks, Martin.
Thank you very much, Martin.
Thanks a million, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Nice to meet you, Hughie.
Thanks. Nice to meet you, Ruby. Nice to meet you, everyone.
Nice to meet you, everyone.
Thanks again for tuning in to this episode of The HazBeanz Show. The HazBeanz Show is available on all platforms. Do check us out on Facebook, which is The HazBeanz Show, or on Twitter, HazBeanz, @HazBeanz. If you can, we would really appreciate if you could subscribe to our Patreon page, which is www.patreon.com/The HazBeanz Show. The HazBeanz is spelled TheHazBeanzShow. Thank you so much. The HazBeanz podcast is presented by me, Martin Beanz Warde. On sound and sound engineering is Chris Sture. Thanks for tuning in. Catch you next time. It's Beans in a pod, but this pod is travelling.